Good morning, please. Con permiso general. Please take a seat. Good morning, dear General, Colonels, colleagues. We are waiting for the Undersecretary of Defense. Con permiso, Secretaria. The first European Congress on Military Health will be inaugurated. The Undersecretary of Defense, María Amparo Valcárcel García, will chair the event and is accompanied by the Director of CSDN, Lieutenant General Francisco de Paula Bisbal Pons, and the Inspector General of Health, Juan José Sánchez Ramos. Lieutenant General, take the floor.
Mrs. Undersecretary of Defense, Inspector General for Military Health Service, ladies, gentlemen, officers, dear colleagues, good morning. I'm Lieutenant General Francisco Bisbal. I'm Director of the Spanish National Defense Studies Center. In its acronym in Spanish is CSDN. It is a pleasure for me to welcome you to Spain, to Madrid, and to CSDN. It's really a privilege to address such a distinguished audience. Let me start by expressing my gratitude to the organizers of this Congress for choosing this center as the main venue for the event. Thankfully, the situation with COVID-19 seems to be improving, and I'm very happy that this has allowed us to conduct this meeting with a physical presence. There is no doubt that this will improve the perception and interaction of the participants, all of you, and also will allow you to have a better knowledge of Spain, feel our hospitality, and why not enjoy our lifestyle. Let me say now a few words about our center. CESEDEN is the flagship of higher military education in Spain, and also a leading center of excellence in the research, study, and dissemination of peace, security, and defense matters. We're also committed with international cooperation and exchange of new ideas in the field of security and defense. For that reason, we believe that CESEDEN is an excellent place to host this Congress. I'm sure that the change of ideas and improvements related to military health will benefit all of us. In CESEDEN, we carry out up to 16 different courses, some of them considered the cornerstone of the Spanish military education. The Joint Staff course that includes about 30 international officers, the Flag and General Officers Promotion course, or the National Defense course are a good sample of our commitment with high-level military education. Aside from our educational activities, CESEDEN is also well known by its academic studies. We develop an extensive research plan, mainly through our Spanish Institute for Strategic Studies, with a considerable production and dissemination of papers, articles, and other research products carried out by our civilian and military experts. Besides all of that, CESEDEN conducts numerous events similar to this throughout the year. In few words, study, investigation, education, and dissemination on issues directly or indirectly related to security and defense world are our business. So let me assess again that you are in the right place for this Congress in Madrid. Let me finish by wishing you profitable working sessions. We will try to give you our best support, so let us know whether you have any requirements. Finally, I hope that you will enjoy the seminar and also that you could find some free time to enjoy Madrid. Now, I will give the floor to the Undersecretary of Defense. Thank you very much for your attention.
Excelentísimo señor director del CESEDEN, excelentísimo señor inspector general de Sanidad. Muchas gracias. Hoy iniciamos el primer Congreso de Sanidad Militar con el lema Ubi Concordia, Ibi Victoria, en este Centro Superior de Estudios de la Defensa Nacional. Quiero dar a todos ustedes una cordial bienvenida a las autoridades civiles y militares presentes españolas, también las autoridades de la Unión Europea, del Mando Médico Europeo y del Estado Mayor de la Unión Europea. Bienvenidos todos. Quiero dar la bienvenida también a todos los ponentes, congresistas y a todos los que nos acompañan presencialmente en este acto, pero también a los que nos seguirán virtualmente en streaming a través del canal de Internet de este Congreso, cumpliendo, además, las medidas recomendadas por las autoridades sanitarias españolas para la prevención y contención de la pandemia de COVID-19. Esta pandemia, que ha conmocionado a nuestras sociedades, ha demostrado que no distingue fronteras ni banderas. La pandemia ha puesto de manifiesto en todos los países el incalculable valor que tienen las Fuerzas Armadas en el apoyo y la protección de la población civil en las emergencias y en toda la crisis sanitaria, demostrándonos por qué están consideradas uno de los instrumentos más eficaces en apoyo a la acción de los Estados durante todo tipo de emergencias. En España, las Fuerzas Armadas y la sanidad militar han superado importantísimos desafíos, adaptándose para colaborar en el planeamiento y ejecución de los nuevos protocolos de prevención y actuación ante COVID-19, pero sobre todo activando todas sus capacidades y experiencia adquirida frente a brotes pandémicos, epidémicos y, lo que es muy importante resaltar, todo esto manteniendo al mismo tiempo el constante apoyo sanitario a todas las misiones y operaciones militares. Bajo el lema Ubi Concordia y Vi Victoria, que, como ustedes bien saben, significa donde hay unidad está la victoria, este Congreso de Sanidad Militar, su comité científico responsable de la organización, han propuesto para discusión los temas relacionados con el apoyo en las situaciones de emergencia sanitaria, sobre todo los que hemos realizado, los que han realizado las Fuerzas Armadas en la situación de la pandemia por COVID-19. Gracias a las valiosas contribuciones de todos los asistentes, hemos podido organizar 3 paneles de discusión. En el primero de ellos, apoyo militar para la creación de reservas europeas estratégicas de medicamentos y productos sanitarios frente a pandemias. Para nosotros es esencial y esperamos que nuestra experiencia sea una contribución importantísima al conocimiento en este Congreso. En ese panel se va a analizar el apoyo militar necesario para establecer reservas estratégicas de medicamentos y material sanitario, de manera que nos permita en el futuro estar preparados ante cualquier tipo de emergencia, catástrofe, amenaza por riesgos biológicos, químicos, nucleares, epidemias de gran escala o focos de enfermedad localizada potencialmente grave. Se ha demostrado que una identificación y preposicionamiento de determinado material crítico puede garantizar una respuesta eficaz en los primeros momentos de la crisis, que son los más duros, los más difíciles. Los retos a asumir son de muy diversa naturaleza: capacidad de producción de las naciones, inteligencia sanitaria, logística, normativa, recursos financieros, por supuesto, modo de contratación y obtención, bien lo hemos visto en esta última pandemia, y la interoperabilidad. En el segundo panel, denominado Retos operativos en estados de incertidumbre, incluyendo el apoyo sanitario a las misiones y operaciones de la Unión Europea, su adaptación y las lecciones aprendidas. Se analizará en este segundo panel los desafíos operativos a los que debe poder enfrentarse la sanidad militar en un estado de incertidumbre, así como su capacidad de adaptación y resiliencia, y todo ello sin limitar el permanente apoyo sanitario a las misiones y operaciones militares en curso. Todas las misiones y operaciones que realiza España, pero también en las que está involucrada, que desarrolla actualmente la Unión Europea, con refuerzo de todo lo que es la cooperación en seguridad y defensa. Durante una crisis sanitaria, tanto los sistemas nacionales de salud como el apoyo sanitario a las operaciones deben seguir funcionando eficazmente, pero con una notable diferencia, y es que deberán muy probablemente ayudarse mutuamente. En tercer lugar, finalmente, en el tercer panel, cuyo título es Apoyo militar a los planes europeos de vacunación frente a pandemias. En este panel se va a valorar el papel de los servicios de la sanidad militar de la Unión Europea durante la pandemia, todo el apoyo que hemos hecho a las autoridades civiles y en especial en la ejecución de aquellas medidas preventivas de carácter general y comunitario, como son, por ejemplo, los planes de vacunación. Las vacunas han revolucionado la sanidad moderna, han ayudado a reducir la propagación de enfermedades infecciosas mortales. Las estrategias europeas planteadas el año pasado para acelerar el desarrollo de las vacunas frente a COVID-19 han sido unas estrategias notoriamente exitosas. En España, el número de vacunas Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca y Janssen gestionadas exclusivamente por la sanidad militar para vacunar a su personal, tanto militar como civil, alcanza la cifra de 212.238, de las cuales se han administrado 172.454, es decir, el 81,3% de las suministradas. La sanidad militar también ha sido, en España, la encargada de vacunar al personal español participante en los Juegos Olímpicos, en los Juegos Paralímpicos, personal del equipo nacional de fútbol participando en la Eurocopa. Es decir, que nuestra colaboración ha sido muy intensa con las actividades sociales que el Gobierno de España nos ha encargado. Quisiera destacar también que en el apoyo entre organismos de la Administración del Estado y las Fuerzas Armadas han participado, por ejemplo, en apoyo al Ministerio de Sanidad y a las comunidades autónomas en el transporte de vacunas en territorio nacional, por ejemplo, en los territorios insulares, Baleares y Canarias, y también en las ciudades autónomas de Ceuta y Melilla. En este momento, nuestro reto es la máxima contribución a lo que es la Reserva Estratégica Nacional. Como dato importante, el almacenamiento y custodia en este momento de 450.000 vacunas Pfizer del Ministerio de Sanidad en el Centro Militar de Farmacia es un ejemplo de la importancia que la Reserva Estratégica Nacional tiene en España, el papel de liderazgo que desarrolla el Ministerio de Defensa y, más en concreto, nuestro Centro Militar de Farmacia, dependiente del Inspector General de Sanidad. Señoras y señores, este Congreso brinda una oportunidad de compartir las mejores prácticas para que las Fuerzas Armadas puedan apoyar planes de vacunación masiva y la forma de optimizar la coordinación de medidas en la certificación europea del estado de inmunización de los ciudadanos de la Unión. Está programada una visita a la base aérea de Torrejón, durante la cual las delegaciones, ustedes, van a poder asistir a una exposición de capacidades militares útiles para el apoyo a autoridades civiles durante una crisis sanitaria, así como a un simulacro que recoja las opciones de evacuación médica en condiciones de bioseguridad. Durante esta visita se contará con el apoyo de unidades de nuestra Fuerza Aérea y de la Unidad Militar de Emergencias. Como he tenido la oportunidad ahora mismo de citar a la Unidad Militar de Emergencias, quiero señalarles que en este momento un importante destacamento de nuestra Unidad Militar de Emergencias se encuentra en la isla de La Palma, en las Islas Canarias, que está sufriendo su población los estragos de la erupción volcánica en Cumbre Vieja. A todos ellos, nuestro recuerdo, a todos los ciudadanos que sepan que cuentan con todo el apoyo del Ministerio de Defensa y de todos los ciudadanos. Este primer Congreso de Sanidad Militar, de carácter multidisciplinar e internacional, queremos que sirva para exponer los resultados obtenidos por las diferentes especialidades sanitarias e intercambiar conocimientos científicos. A todos, muchas gracias por la inestimable labor llevada a cabo por todos los organismos de las Fuerzas Armadas implicados en la organización de este Congreso, tanto a su comité organizador como al comité científico. Les deseo el mayor éxito, porque este Congreso va a contribuir a reforzar la colaboración entre las naciones de la Unión Europea, estrechando nuestros lazos de amistad. Pero yo no quiero finalizar mis palabras sin un recuerdo a todas las personas que han sufrido la pandemia, directamente o en sus familias, muy especialmente los hombres y mujeres de nuestras Fuerzas Armadas, por supuesto las de todos los hombres y mujeres de las familias europeas que se han visto tan afectadas. Por supuesto, nuestra solidaridad con todos los ciudadanos que lo han sufrido, pero también quiero poner muy en valor cómo han podido responder nuestras Fuerzas Armadas, muy especialmente la sanidad militar. Para ellos, todo mi reconocimiento, porque es impagable su labor como sanitarios, como militares, pero sobre todo su solidaridad como ciudadanos europeos. A todos, muchas gracias y en nombre de la señora ministra de Defensa, declaro inaugurado el primer Congreso de Sanidad Militar. Gracias. Muchas gracias.
our Surgeon General, on your behalf. Now is going to give a small speech, the head of the Spanish Armed Force Military Medical Services, Major General Juan José Sánchez Ramos. Mr. General, your floor is yours.
Generals, civil and military authorities, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to second the welcoming words of the Undersecretary and thank you for your attendance to the first European Union Congress on Military Health Service, to be held over the next 3 days in the incomparable setting in this center, the Higher Center for National Defense Studies, CCDEN. Thanks to the military health authorities accompanying us. Thanks to the delegations of the participating countries and international organizations, and to the staff involved in the organization of the Congress from a wide range of organizations and institutions, and the Secretary for Defense, Defense General Staff, SEMAT, General Secretariat for Defense Policy, SECENPOL, Higher Center for National Defense Studies, CCDEN, Air Force and the Emergency Military Unit for their support to the exercise scheduled for this afternoon, Military Residencia El Alcázar, Inspectorate General for Defense Health and Health Directorate of the Navy, Army and Air Force. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, joining us in person or via streaming. You are all aware that the main ideas in this Congress will focus on 3 lines of action in the face of the pandemic caused by COVID-19. Operational challenge, vaccine,
Sorry. Thank you. Operational challenge, vaccination plans, and strategic stockpiles. This coronavirus has produced terrible effects. The crisis has been an enormous challenge, and we must work to increase the military health service cooperation, reflecting on our structure and organization. The current Spanish national security strategies states that in recent decades there has been an increase in the number of emerging and re-emerging disease and their risks. So, the millennium started with the threat of anthrax and smallpox bioterrorism. From 2009 onwards, different strains of the influenza virus A emerged, as well as several pre-COVID-19 coronavirus disease, such as SARS, severe acute respiratory syndrome, and MERS, Middle East respiratory syndrome. Very important too have been several Ebola virus outbreaks, challenges that in our country require air evacuation and hospitalization under isolated conditions, as well as specific protocols. This background led to a specific preparedness for outbreaks and to the creation of the high-level isolation unit for high-risk infection disease, one in Spanish, built on the 22nd floor of the Central Defense Hospital in 2016. The preparedness included the adoption of capabilities and response plans among regional, national, and international organizations. However, these previous outbreaks involved a limited number of cases. By contrast, the COVID-19 pandemic has required the availability of all resources of the state. In Spain, among these resources, the armed forces, together with the state institutions and public administration, have participated to preserve the security and welfare of citizens in case of serious risks and disaster or other public needs, and to ensure the provision of all services for the protection of people, property, and place. For this reason, the participation of the Spanish armed forces to support the state's action in the pandemic has been and continues to be intense. In this regard, our Minister of Defense stated in one of her public interventions, the armed forces are the strength of the state. They belong to each and every one of us. When we support them, we support very important values, which are democracy, peace, freedom, and security. Our military have written a brilliant page in the recent history of Spain for the magnificent management, coordination, planning, and deployment to fight against the coronavirus, proving that in the most difficult and adverse moments, the armed forces are always alongside Spanish society, which they form part of and serve. On March 11, 2020, the World Health Organization upgraded the COVID-19 to an international pandemic. On March 14, the Spanish government declared a state of alarm, ordering the use of the armed forces under the sole command of the Chief of the Defense Staff, GEMAF in Spanish, and initiating crisis response planning. The rapid evolution of the pandemic led to an unprecedented health crisis due to the large number of citizens who were affected and its economic, political, and social consequences. Collapse of the healthcare system, lack of healthcare resources, exhaustion of and market stress in the face of demand, inconsistent action protocols, variable and experimental therapeutic guidelines, overflow of emergency department, intensive care units, hospital wards, and 13 hospital service, and movement restriction. This situation called for extraordinary measures. Among them, the greatest deployment of the armed forces in peacetime, in support of the civilian population to manage the health crisis. First, within the framework of the so-called Operation Balmy, and later in Operation Baluarte, still underway. As this is one of the scenarios provided for in the legislation, the intervention of the armed forces in the pandemic was planned and carried out following the usual operational planning procedures. The Minister of Defense was in charge of the direction and the guidance. The relevant military directives were issued by the Chief of the Defense Staff, GEMAF, while the necessary operation plans were prepared by the Commander of the Operation Command, CEMOPS. Operation Balmis mobilized numerous operational capabilities from the Army, Navy, Air Force, emergency military units, and Inspectorate General for Defense Health. Operation Balmis lasted 98 days. There were 20,000 interventions in support of 2,003 towns, 11,000 disinfection, 5,300 action in nursing homes, 3,500 in hospital health care centers, with the participation of over 190,000 military personnel. Practically all missions undertaken by the Spanish Armed Forces during Operation Balmis has a direct or indirect impact on health. Presence in public space and critical infrastructures, direct support to civilian healthcare facilities, all kinds of support to nursing homes and care centers for vulnerable people, support in the transport of patients between hospitals, transport of corpses to temporary morgues, disinfection in public space, support to the national health system, support to the national initiative in epidemiological surveillance, diagnostic capabilities, production of medicines and pharmaceutical products, strategic transport from Asia, and national distribution of medical supplies and products. The Baluarte operation was an extension of Operation Balmis after the first pandemic wave and in the face of a possible new crisis. His main features were sanitary support, continued disinfection of facilities, epidemiological tracking and surveillance, logistical support, cybersecurity, establishment of mobile vaccination team. Military health service have been an outstanding actor in the military contribution in support of the civilian authorities during both operations. In Spain, the military health corps is integrated by physicians, nurses, pharmacists, veterinarians, dentists, and psychologists. It is a unique multidisciplinary corps operating in 6 different structures which compose our armed forces and the Ministry of Defense headquarters. These structures are the Inspectorate General for Defense Health, IGESANDEF, responsible for the health authority, planning and development of health policy within the Ministry of Defense, and advising the Department of Military and Civilian Health issues. The Joint Chief of Health, which advises the Chief of the Defense Staff on operational health matters. Reporting functionally to the IGESAM, the Health Directorate of the Army, Navy, and Air Force, as well as the Health Service of the Military Emergency Unit. Among the 6 organizations, there is a network of health service distributed through Spain and located in base, unit, center, and organization. Health support is always carried out according to the guidelines issued by the GEMAD and the head of the Undersecretary of Defense. When decision-making deadlines are shortened, as it happened in the face of the COVID-19, it was a wise decision to bring together the entire operation under a single command. The Operation Command, MOP, was responsible for the direction, planning, and coordination of all the health support of the operation, and established the priorities and assigned the task. Under this scheme, military health service have carried out a wide range of intervention which will be showcased in the different panels and activities of this Congress. The health service of the Army, Navy, and Air Force, as well as the health service of the Military Emergency Unit, were fundamental to guarantee in their respective area of competence health consulting duties to the command at all decision-making levels, advice of the procurement of medical supply and support in their distribution, advice and technical direction of disinfection work, ongoing psychological support to responders and civilian population, trackers, training, management, and their deployment in support of civilian authorities, epidemiological surveillance, the development of specific vaccination plans, as well as the storage and distribution of vaccines, and the coordination of vaccination points, including in support of other authorities. Special mention should be made to the work of the 3 Air Directorates of the Army, Navy, and Air Force to enhance civilian health capabilities and our own military hospital facility. Some examples. The collaboration of the Army and the Air Force was key in the rapid assembly of the new health facility established in Fairground IFEMA, Madrid, the precursor of the current Isabel Zendal Hospital for Pandemics. Collaboration in the reinforcement of civilian hospital with modular expansion of the emergency service following the guidelines of the Ministry of Health. During the most pressing moment, military hospital, especially the Central Defense Hospital in Madrid, received invaluable help from the Army and the Military Emergency Unit to guarantee their operation by sending specific means, such as oxygen generator, electromedical and intensive care equipment, anesthesia tower, portable respirator, food container, and also mortuary containers, and technical personnel such as communication specialists, electrician, plumber, and catering staff. The Spanish Navy brought to different points of our coast and by means of amphibious assault ship, air treatment unit and reinforced Role 1 and Role 2 type, and enlisted 4 others to prevent situations of local capacity shortage. More broadly, it should be noted that based on criteria of effectiveness and logistical efficiency, and given the high volume of resources involved in the crisis, the authority assigned the Army Logistical Support Command, MALE in Spanish, has the leading logistical body in technical coordination with the IGESANDEF for the procurement, management, and to storage the air material and the transportation and distribution through the country. It should also be highlighted the work of the personnel management authorities to mobilize non-regular human resources such as reservists and students on the Military School of Air and the extraordinary recruitment of specialist personnel. During the pandemic, the Joint Forces has maintained the operational commitment undertaken for peacekeeping in different parts of the world, as well as permanent mission to ensure national security. To manage the overall complexity of this joint effort in all ongoing operations, including a specific pandemic response operation, we must highlight the key role of the Air Advisor at the strategic and operational level, GECOSAM and JMED in Spanish, who always play a central role in the direction, coordination, and synchronization of operations, and who have had to redouble their effort in an extraordinary way over the past 2 years. Finally, I will describe the action of the IGESANDEF, Inspectorate General for Defense Health, my direct area of responsibility in the pandemic at the tactical level. IGESANDEF manage the military air network, which consists of the Central Defense Hospital in Madrid, the General Defense Hospital in Zaragoza, and the following specialized technical centers: Institute of Preventive Medicine, Blood Transfusion Center, Military Pharmacy Center, Military Veterinary Center, Institute of Toxicology, Depot and Central Pharmacies of the Inspectorate. This network was activated to act in 2 directions. 1, to provide air protection to our own forces in homeland and abroad. 2, to provide air support to civilian authorities. The network was also activated to be ready to receive from the rest of the components of the operation the necessary support and sustaining to reinforce itself, and simultaneously to enlist personnel and means for an eventual deployment of air treatment unit by the operation. The GESANDEF set up a specific monitoring cell to carry out his tasks as a component of the operation, and all his specialized centers not only activated their capacities, but they also increased and reoriented them to develop the necessary health service to face the health crisis: assistance, logistics, analytical, advisory, educational, and forensic functions. At the HESANDEF tactical level, we can highlight the increase in activity of the military hospital. Under great pressure to provide care, the Central Defense Hospital was transformed into a COVID hospital, doubling the number of hospitalization and intensive care unit beds and quadrupling the emergency service. This required an exemplary versatility of human resources and a great flexibility to enable hospitalization in unusual space. We can highlight the extraordinary increase in counseling as well as in the production of technical hair regulation for the operation of the Preventive Medicine Institute for the promotion of hair disease prevention and surveillance. The Military Pharmacy Center changed its layout and reinforced the production of medicine and pharmaceutical products to guarantee the supply of the hair resources. The manufacture of hydroalcoholic solution for hand disinfection was started, and the production of paracetamol, azithromycin, hydrochloroquine, and the broad-spectrum antiviral injectable ribavirin was increased, although it was not used in the end. In addition, a production facility was also equipped for the manufacture of surgical masks. The existing molecular biology laboratories increased drastically their diagnostics capacity for the identification of SARS-CoV-2 by polymerase chain reaction, PCR, in several laboratories working in a coordinated network. So, to the hospital clinical diagnostic laboratories, the laboratory of the Military Veterinary Center and the Institute of Toxicology were added. The Military Veterinary Center controlled the technical management of specialized disinfection and their execution, as well as the planning of action to maintain this capability in view of the lack of personnel that was detected. The Armed Forces Blood Transfusion Center collaborated in a clinical trial to study the effectiveness and safety of hyperimmune plasma obtained from COVID-19 recovered patients and its use to prevent severe disease in other patients. The psychological hotline for responders staffed by psychology officers was set up, as well as the development of documents with a specific recommendation for commanders to preserve the resilience of responders, the provision of psychological support to nursing homes and other centers for vulnerable people. Through the coronavirus crisis, it has become clear that the health support demanded by civilian authorities not always match the health support capabilities the armed forces prepare for operation. It often consists of specific manpower requirements in health facilities, specific health equipment and other research, which surrendered could result in the loss of the complete health capabilities. When analyzing the degree of suitability of health capabilities to these scenarios, we should consider options to improve planning concurrently with the authorities to be supported, as well as probably an approach to the catalog of requirements that is more oriented to a specific item than to deployable capabilities. This would enable military health service and national health service to be prepared with a mutual and constant knowledge of each other's capabilities in order to ensure an effective redundancy of systems in case of need. Maintaining the technical expertise and specialization of military air personnel, as well as the military inherent flexibility to adapt, can provide important rapid support. Therefore, it's crucial to maintain the intense effort undertaken in military education and to review instruction and training plans in the light of the lesson learning. It has become evident that the production and supply of medicine, hair products, laboratory reagents, etc., are not fully controlled by the state in an immediate manner. Given all these observations, it is not surprising that our defense minister expressed in Parliament last year the need to reflect on the necessary military health care model to improve preparedness for pandemic such as the one we have experienced without neglecting operational support. The minister said, "This epidemic has revealed shortcomings in military health care. Since we have a healthcare system that is more prepared for mission, also it was not as prepared for a pandemic as the one we have experienced, our armed forces have shown precisely that it is absolutely essential for them to be prepared. This reflection will be the more effective, the more coordinated it is within the European Union. There are tools for this, an example of which is the permanent structured cooperation, the European Medical Command. At the Foreign Affairs Defense Council held in November 2020, the initiative of this European Union Congress on Military Health Service arose with the aim of debating, reflecting, and sharing our points of view in order to identify lessons on the response to the health crisis. The Spanish Ministry of Defense has strongly promoted this initiative, convinced of the need and the advantage of the objectives. We will focus on three objectives related to the COVID-19 pandemic we consider to be primary interest to military health today. First, operational challenge in a state of uncertainty, such as at the beginning of the COVID-19 health crisis, in the absence of protection material, with an unstable action protocol in the face of an unknown agent, and maintaining air support to ongoing mission and operation, continually adapting to the new circumstances. Second, military support to European vaccination plan against pandemic. The availability of vaccine 10 months after the beginning of the pandemic required a special effort to start the vaccination campaign and to arrange the storage and distribution in very different conditions of conservation and a rapid collection of the necessary medical device for their correct administration. The deployment of mobile vaccination teams through all the country and the recording of events in information system was another challenge. Global support to society, transfer of vaccines due to the readjustment between the autonomous communities and the Ministry of Defense. The existence of European vaccination recommendation or plan issued by the European Health Authority to cover critical population sectors where the effort is more intense and specialized is needed. Third, military support for the establishment of European strategic stockpile of medicine and health resources against pandemic. The current crisis is a paradigm of the new pandemics and raises the national need for a strategic national warehouse and a strategic national stockpile of essential products with a volume at least 5 times greater than that of the pre-COVID-19. I hope this first European Congress on Military Health Service will be a great success. I hope it will enhance collaboration between our military air service and the organization of the Ministry of Defense of the European Union and the public administration in all matters concerning air crisis and their plan of action. Thank you very much.
Good morning, Brigadier General Cobbett. Can you hear me loud and clear? Not at all. Second shot. Good morning.
Good morning.
Can you hear me loud and clear?
Yeah, that's fine. Can I start?
Yeah. No, just a minute, please. I will introduce you. It's my time.
Sorry for that.
Come on. So, marshals, sergeant generals, brigadiers, military comrades, all ladies and gentlemen, dear streamers all over the world and far beyond, thank you for joining the Congress. I am Brigadier General José María Delgado, Chief of the Joint Health Defense Staff of the Kingdom of Spain. Great. Today we will enjoy the attendance of Brigadier General Stefan Kovic, Director since July 2019 of MMCC-EMC, that far from being a diabolical tongue twister, stands for a meaningful multinational medical coordination center, European Medical Command. Brigadier General Kovic will perform online, all the way from the most noble city of Koblenz or surroundings, great, in fierce combat against an unfortunate cold. By the way, Koblenz was born as a military outpost. Save this data, we will return to it. My first thought when knowing the title selected by Brigadier General Stefan Kovic, combining efforts in medical support in Europe, was, I never imagined in my wildest dreams this day would be close to come true. The long road, bridging the gap, among hoping that the goddess of fortune will be on our side and piece of cake for our capacities, is almost over. Almost. At least speaking in terms of common basic purposes and actions. Second thought was just courageous men in the 60s, ready to go even in adversity, good looking, with large family, kids and grandchildren, like Stefan and myself, are rewarded in Labor Days with achievements like these, MNCC, EMC, for such a biological, lifelong effort. Thank you, Stefan, you really make my day. As it is displayed in MMCC-EMC main webpage, quote, none of the nations is capable of ensuring the provision of all phases of medical support required for a NATO or European Union-led operation on its own. Therefore, to rely on additional organizational solutions on health coordination cooperation to support the interoperable capacity look extremely convenient. Wise advice. In other words, make a virtue out of necessity always works. Coming down from vision, dreams, to real stuff, so to say, budget scarcity, personal shortage, equipment dissimilarities, unequal ship-mill approach to concept and protocols, and guess who is who regarding command and control are the main features of the making of the never-ending world-renowned TV drama health series, Get It or Bust, to be continued. No wonder from the dawn of times military health service thrive upon restraints, constraints, and limitations. All rockers never die. Please keep on rolling. To improve situational medical awareness, to pursue the best coordination among several national capabilities, to face assigned tasks in an efficient way, to reach the necessary economy of effort, avoiding duplicity, and to spread operational expertise by all means, are, no doubt, and hopefully, the current battle rhythm of the old frontline outpost in Koblenz. So, without any further ado, wishing you, sir, a fast recovery, asking for you to lighten this current topic, and giving us some messages to carry out back home, please, Brigadier General Kovic, take over. The floor and the screen are yours.
Dear General Ramos, dear Surgeon Generals, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your kind introduction. It's an honor for me to provide a lecture for this important Congress, the first European Union Congress on Military Health Service. Thank you to the Armed Forces of Spain and its medical service for all the efforts to make this important event possible. As a result of my responsibilities as a grandfather, I got infection by my grandchild Pauline, who transferred the infection from her kindergarten. I would prefer to be healthy and personally present between you all, but I think it's better I did not infect you. Here is the agenda for today. A quick background showing the mission and task organization of MMCC-EMC, our special emphasis on medical situation awareness. I will also highlight our wargaming expertise and the MMCC-EMC support to the COVID-19 crisis in Europe, including stockpiling efforts. Another important focus of my briefing will be the capability development based on multinational medical force building. Finally, I will sum up. The security environment in Europe has changed dramatically during the last decade. The diversification of threats and actors is generating new challenges to the defense and security communities as well as to society as a whole. The President of the European Union Commission, Ms. von der Leyen, provided on the 15th of September 2021 an important speech for the European Parliament in Strasbourg, the so-called State of Union Address. She mentioned the European Union is a new security provider. There will be missions more where NATO or United Nations will be not present, but where the European Union should be. On the ground, our soldiers work side by side with police officers, lawyers and doctors. We can combine military and civilian along with diplomacy in development, and we have a long history in building and protecting peace. This speech shows that tasks and responsibilities for the armed forces in Europe, including their medical service, might increase in the future for missions abroad and especially for European Union theatre. Based on the COVID crisis, similar after the financial crisis, the medical services will face a scarcity of resources versus the increasing request for military medical readiness and medical resilience efforts for the European Union. There is a requirement for a coordinating capability to support military medical services, the facilitation of civil-military medical interface in NATO-European Union medical cooperation on the operational level. The MMCC-EMC has its roots in both NATO and European Union initiatives, of which Germany, via the Bundeswehr Medical Service, serves as a lead. European Union Permanent Structured Cooperation, NATO Framework Nation Concept. Both initiatives, MMCC and EMC, fill a gap in the framework for effective coordination and cooperation between nations at the operational level. Goals and tasks and processes at MMCC and EMC are highly similar and comparable, although they serve two different institutions. The two projects have been merged in one single entity, the so-called MMCC-EMC, as a model for effective use of resources through national efforts and multinational cooperation. The challenges and shortfalls in the field of medical support faced by both organizations call for intensive collaboration and cooperation. This is the spirit of our work, stated in our vision, combining efforts in medical support. As a dynamic and innovative institution, 18 participating nations contribute to the expertise of MMCC-EMC. All 18 participating nations signed the Declaration of Initial Operating Capability. 83% of the depicted participating nations are European Union member nations as well NATO nations. It is our intent to achieve full operating capability for crisis response till the end of 2021. MMC-EMC mission is to support on request European Union and NATO military medical service and headquarters, facilitation of capability development with the participating nations and European Union NATO stakeholders, coordination of medical tasks for rapid reinforcement and enablement for Europe, including medical situation awareness, expansion of civil-military medical interface, enhancement of military medical resilience, strategic patient flow management, multinational supply solutions, and, if possible, coordinated procurement of medical material. In 2020, we finalized the formalization of cooperation by an exchange of letter with European External Action Service and NATO headquarters SHAPE. The steering committee of MMCC-EMC, with representatives of the participating nations, grant the governance and tasking authority. Key personnel includes a Deputy Director for European Union Matters, provided by France, and a Deputy Director for NATO Matters, provided by the Netherlands. They are responsible for the respective European Union or NATO-only projects and security issues. Thank you to the medical service of the armed forces of Belgium, France, Hungary, Luxembourg, and Netherlands and United States, who are providing staff members at the moment on a permanent basis, At the moment, we are organizing a situation center, expanding current project-oriented support capability by building up operational coordinating capability. If the complexity and time sensitiveness of a crisis require the synchronization of the expertise and capabilities of MMCC-EMC branches, the Situation Center will be activated. We will support with coordinating efforts and service for the medical reinforcement of Europe, medical situation awareness and analysis, and the development of search capabilities for crisis. Examples for search capacity are reinforcement of a medical treatment facility with additional ICU capacity or laboratory capabilities. Very important are our coordinating efforts for patient flow management with focus on strategic medical evacuation. A comprehensive patient flow management which integrates national responsibilities for threat medevac is a key element of a robust the resilient and flexible medical support system during a crisis or an Article 5 operation. We started a stakeholder mapping. We could create and connect representatives of the European Air Transport Command, which is built up of 7 nations, and the US Air Force Theater Patient Movement Requirement Center East, located in Ramstein. Processes are now better known between these two important stakeholders. We provided operational knowledge to the guidance for civil-military cooperation for the evacuation of patients in large-scale emergency, which will be developed by the NATO HQ at Brussels in cooperation with the Joint Health Group. The intent of this document is to harmonize, if possible and reasonable, military efforts with civilian stakeholders for better preparedness, especially for strategic medevac. In parallel, we are working with civilian European Union entities like DG ECHO, which is responsible for European civil protection and humanitarian aid operations. Part of DG ECHO is the Emergency Response Coordination Center. As an additional asset, the European Union established a European reserve of additional capacities, the rescue mechanism. The reserve includes firefighting planes and helicopters and medical equipment. The European Union is currently developing medical evacuation capacities. Additionally, we collected the data and SMEs for StratMedevac of our 18 participation nations. One of the core tasks of the MMCC-EMC is the development of a multinational medical common operating picture, which is called medical situational awareness. During the development of our concept, we identified a gap for standardization. There is no medical standard which covers the topic regarding medical situational awareness and reporting for peacetime and crisis. The existing reporting systems of NATO and European Union are geared to the requirements of the operational commanders of the respective joint area of operation. The current experience from the COVID-19 pandemic have shown the necessity to have a comprehensive multinational military health service situation picture with regard to various health service data and information. The MNCC-EMC developed the first multinational medical concept regarding medical situational awareness, which is based on the idea of an incident-based system supported by a subject matter experts network and supplemented by open sources. By this project, we are breaking new ground. MNC-EMC intent is to be a broker of information, or better, a broker of the information, how to reach the right SME who knows the required information. There's a fundament of knowledge, the basic layer of our system, with static data, which change very rarely, and which can be used for almost all conceivable events, for example, location of hyperbaric chambers, burn centers, and military hospitals. The advanced layer contains data that change on a more regular basis, but is neither sensitive, time-sensitive, or highly specific for an incident. As an example, the number of beds in a burn center. The data will be collected regularly. The incident-based layer contains data that is highly specific for an incident and can be time-sensitive. An example for an incident-related request of information has been the task to create a medical picture during the evacuation operation of Afghan civilians out of Kabul. The non-combatant evacuation operation, which changed to a combat environment by the ISIL threat and terrorist attacks, has been organized by the nations without coordination of NATO. At 18th of August, 7 o'clock Zulu, the MMCC-EMC received an information request from the Belgian Joint Medical Service. They were asking us to assist in build-up of a MedCop regarding the medical capabilities deployed to Kabul airport or in the region. We activated the citizen. Based on our network, we have been able to connect with different important stakeholders, including US CENTCOM. It took 5 hours to build up a valid medical picture, which we could share with our nations. On the slide, you can see an example for the contribution of the German Medical Service for the NEO operation. The task also shows the requirement that the medical service have timely access to NATO and European Union secret lines, which is still a challenge. One of the gaps identified was the lack of a medical expertise in designing and executing tabletop exercise and war games. At the operational level, in a remarkable short time, MMCC-EMC developed and implemented a series of war games initiating extensive participation of our nations and NATO European Union stakeholders to challenge and enhance medical decision-making capability throughout Europe. The war game Casualty Move 2020 provided an excellent training environment for the medical staff of a multinational division and its brigades in a NATO Article 5 MGO Plus scenario. Another contribution in response to the COVID-19 pandemic was being the exercise Resilient Response 2020. The purpose of RERE 2020 was to provide interdepartmental, cross-sector, multinational epidemic pandemic war game with the aim to train decision-making for mainly strategic leadership. It simulated a crisis environment with a focus on European countries. One important conclusion of the exercise has been that education and awareness of what constitutes a hybrid threat will be essential in future wargaming events. Based on these requirements, the next wargaming, Resilient Medical Interface 21, will be conducted in November this year. Our main focus has a main focus on a crisis on NATO flanks with mainly hybrid threats be prior an armed conflict. The REMI 21 wargaming is a contribution to train our medical crisis management. Possible events are the contamination of a field training area with a drone spreading white powder which causes an infectious disease. Clearly, it's anthrax. A chemical plant explosion, and shortly after, a terrorist attack against EU Enhanced Force Presence battle group in a Baltic country. Crime conglomeratic fever outbreak during military training mission. These crisis-like developments with medical focus need civilian military and supranational coordination. This war game will focus on training and exercising MNCC-EMC capability as multinational coordination element and utilizing our citizen. The key challenge will be that the MNC-EMC will organize and facilitate the wargaming on one hand and will be in parallel primary training audience and supported by our participating nations. REMI 21 will increase readiness and make concepts and strategy alive and work. More harmonization and closer cooperation in cross-border health emergencies will improve our preparedness for medical-related crises and against emerging health threats in Europe. During the COVID crisis, MNCC-EMC used its established network to create links between health services for questions about aeromedical evacuation, rail ambulances, and the provision of medical equipment like respirators or laboratory equipment for COVID testing. The MNCC-EMC provided the wargaming of pandemic RERE 2020 just prior to the third wave in Europe. The MNCC-EMC was able to gain initial experience for stockpiling in April 2020, when it was asked by the Euro-Atlantic Disaster Response Coordination Center of NATO HQ to develop a concept on medical stockpiling for the NATO COVID Trust Fund. One important part of the concept is a calculator that is used to compute cost, storage, space, and personnel for each module. A lot of medical equipment and financial resources has been provided for the trust fund based on this concept. 200 ventilators, Albania, Montenegro, and North Macedonia got $1.8 million in medical supplies, and the Ukrainian got in August 21, 10 tons of personal protective equipment. Based on these experiences, the MNCC have extended the medical stockpiling concept to the so-called military modular multipurpose epidemic pandemic stockpiling concept, which is accessible to European Union and NATO nations and medical stockholders, also in the civilian arena. As a surge capacity, rapidly deployable, this modular standard package of medical material have been identified and defined for stockpiling. The 7 modular standard packages, like support for ICU care units, can be used to support both military and civilian medical facilities. For example, the bilateral support that the Bundeswehr Medical Service provided to Portugal included the deployment of ICU capability at Ems, a civilian hospital, utilizing the principles of entry apps concept. The French Medical Service used a similar approach in their country. COVID has shown that we have to focus more on these stockpiling efforts. And also European Union used this stockpiling concept for procurement of PPE for military personnel. But we have to increase this list. It's not should be gone out for COVID and infectious diseases. So we are cooperating on a list which includes CBRN and future trauma hazards. MNC-EMC is cooperating on this field with military and civilian partners like DG ECHO and Director General for Health and Food Safe, this is DG Santé, the NATO Joint Health Group, and Comet CBRN Working Group to increase medical resilience. The effective use of scarce military medical resources is an important coordinating task. The MNC-CMC is facilitating the force building and preparation of multinational modular medical task force or units for European Union battle group and NATO NRF elements. Multinational medical contributions have been integrated and harmonized to a powerful medical modular task force consisting of units, subunits, or personnel from various nations. The success of the multinational medical task force building is a direct result of those nations already contributing to the MNC-CMC and reconfirming the requirement for a multinational approach to medical support. Building upon the multinational medical task force, the MNC-CMC developed the multinational medical concept that describes the medical procedures, responsibilities, and collaborative relationships in a multinational medical environment. It can be used as a blueprint for other nations and medical lead nations in the future. In an additional example for increasing interoperability and readiness is the creation of a SOP library as a mission memory. We do not want to reinvent the wheel. Moreover, it is our aim to collect generic SOPs, references, examples from recent and current missions, operations, and its exercise. These SOP are required for the deployment of the multinational modular medical units. The MNC-CMC will be able to build on these examples and experience multinational modular medical units or task forces as a basis for future deployments with shorter preparation time. I sum up. There is a strong nexus of health and security, and the Surgeon General of Spain brought a lot of excellent examples of these experience during COVID-19. As a result of the COVID crisis, we will face a scarcity of resources. We have to be prepared for increasing cross-border health emergencies. There is a requirement for more cooperation. MNC-CMC is supporting the capability development of the medical services of the participating nations and European Union military capacity with its operational knowledge. MNC-CMC is a catalyst for more cooperation and integration, and we are a lighthouse project for NATO and European Union and civil military cooperation and coordination. As I started my briefing with quotations from Ms. von der Leyen as the President of the European Commission, I will quote her at the end of my lecture. But there is simply no security and defense issue where less cooperation is the answer. We need to invest in our joint partnership and to draw on each side's unique strength. And I will add, MNC-CMC is an example for combining efforts in medical support by facilitating coordination and cooperation. Thank you very much. I hope you could understand me with my horrible cold woes, and I'm open for questions.
General, since there's no questions for you, thank you on behalf of the Congress. As I said, we have to be sharp, and we have asked the coffee to be a little bit later. So it's 11 past 11. So we'll be here at 11:40, please. So we keep the record.
Good morning, General. We'll continue with the first roundtable. Military support for the establishment of European strategic reserves of strategic medical stockpiles against pandemics. Takes the floor Colonel Francisco Javier Alfaro Matos from Spain.
Sir, with your clearance, good morning, everybody. I am at the lectern. I am at the reading desk because of COVID-19 reasons, of course. My name is Colonel Pharmacist Javier Alfaro, Spanish Military Medical Corps, and I'm the chairman of the third panel. In the first program, this panel was the third, of the European Congress on Military Health Services. Currently, I am assigned to the Inspectorate General for Defense Health, and it is my pleasure to celebrate this meeting, the first in person since 2019. And I am very grateful to my Surgeon General to let me chair this particular and interesting roundtable. I would like to introduce the roundtable speakers. From your right, the first one, Romania, Dr. Mariana Floria. The second one, from Portugal, Dr. Maria López Rodríguez Salazar. The third one, the Spanish representative, Lieutenant Colonel Pilar Puente. Afterwards, Colonel Lawrence Calvo, French Medical Corps, and the representative as well from France, Antoine Left, Colonel Antoine Left. Colonel René Pita will be the rapporteur for the wrap-up. Of course, I would like to mention behind the scenes my dear colleagues who have helped me to organize this roundtable, Lieutenant Colonel Juan Carlos Berigüete, of course, Colonel René Pita, last but not least, Major David Crespo. Thank you very much, dear colleagues, dear friends. I would like to brief you about what is going on in this roundtable. First of all, my colleagues will take the word for 15 minutes, each one. And afterwards, if we have time enough, we'll have a period of questions and answers, a discussion part of the roundtable. Afterwards, the rapporteur, René Pita, Colonel René Pita, will summarize the highlights of this roundtable. This roundtable, in the first program, was the third panel. We are now the first, like in St. Matthew, the last shall be the first. We are now the first. I don't know why, but it is my pleasure to be the first. Let's enjoy and relax yourself in this roundtable. Thanks Brexit, we don't have any British native speaker here today. Then it is permitted our accented, heavy accents today. Then Brexit has been awful for all of us, but I always see the bright side of life, like in Monty Python's Life of Brian. Do you remember that hilarious film? Great. I welcome all of you to the third panel, the first one, titled Military Support for the Establishment of European Strategic Reserves for Strategic Medical Stockpile Against Pandemics. A very long title. Well, reserves of medical supplies could be the summarize of this, the resume of the title. The Spanish Surgeon General, hardly 1 year ago, mention Operation Valmis. Let me make a little note. The name of Valmis is related to the Valmis expedition, the Royal Philanthropic Vaccine Expedition, Spanish one, which was a Spanish healthcare mission that lasted from 1803 till 1806, the first years of the 19th century, led by Dr. Francisco Javier de Valmis, by the way, a military surgeon, which vaccinated millions of inhabitants of Spanish America and Asia against smallpox. The expedition sailed on board on Corvette Maria Pita and carried 22 orphans as successive carriers of the virus, with Isabel Zendal, a nurse, the rectoress of A Coruña orphanage. Coruña, a beautiful Spanish northwest city. The Spanish Surgeon General has established the master lines of the Congress. This is an emergency consensus on the important contributions made by military services in support of national response to the COVID-19 pandemic. In order to focus our roundtable today, we should be able to determine why, what, how much, how, where, who, when, and until when of the strategic medical stockpile in Europe. The aim of the panel is to debate, reflect, and share views on issues like identification of the medical practices and equipment that will make up the strategic reserve, medical intelligence, it was mentioned this morning, risk assessment, estimation of quantitative and qualitative needs, interoperability, critical medical products and equipment, legal and economic framework, procurement, acquisition, national autonomy, and European solidarity and subsidiarity, and strategic reserves management model, provisioning, storage, and transportation, competences and responsibilities in order to create a network of links and influence aimed at identifying best practices and lessons learned on response for health crisis and wider military medical support. Well, today we have six lectures to the pillar, 6 different contributions. I think we'll be able to arise interesting conclusions to the final Congress wrap-up. I apologize if I have spoken for too long. Let's begin. According to the program, the first participation is from Romania. I kindly request my speakers to go down and permit Dr. Mariana Floria to take the floor for the first speaker, for the first lecture. I remind you that we have 15 minutes for each one of you. I will sit on the corner and I will be a great mastiff, a cow dog, controlling the time because the schedule is very tight. And not only for the lunch, but for the airbase, we have to depart at 3 o'clock this afternoon. Then I will control you like a dog. Thank you very much.
Can I put the presentation? Yes.
Just at the top, number 1. So this is the yours one. Yes.
Thank you very much for your kind presentations. I am civilian. I am here and I am honored to be here. I am glad to be here at the first European Congress on Military Health Services. I have some problems already. I think is here. Okay, thank you. This COVID-19 pandemic is a systemic disease, implies a systemic disease with variable severity and progressions. We know now that these COVID-19 infections is frequently a pulmonary disease, but in some patients, because of host immune response, could be severe forms of this disease because of multi-organ dysfunctions. In addition, COVID-19 disease implies important costs for diagnosis, for drugs, and for hospitalizations. Why? Because the manifestations of these COVID-19 infections are variable. It could have cerebral, cardiac, digestive, or renal manifestations, and therefore the costs are very high. We know also that COVID-19 changed the economics of healthcare. In a recently published paper, we know that the costs are for nursing, home care, and home health was during 1 year of this pandemic twice decreased. And also for physician services, the costs were higher 3 times. Therefore, we learned that the profiles of COVID-19 patients have many potential applications. Planning and budgeting for use of healthcare resources and services is very important, besides of risk factors, treatment protocols, priorities, vaccination distributions, or clinical trials. We analyzed the costs for hospital stay in patients with COVID-19 disease in a small military hospital located in the northwest of Romania. This hospital has almost 200 beds. 10% of these beds was allocated to take care of COVID-19 patients. That means 20 beds. In our country, hospitals were classified in COVID hospitals, non-COVID hospitals, and also support COVID. My hospital was support COVID. And as material and methods for this paper, we respect the national protocol for the treatment of COVID-19 infections, and we applied it. In patients, COVID-19 hospitalization costs were analyzed regardless of ICD-10 procedure codes. That means the costs are real. As results, in our hospital, during almost 8 months, was hospitalized 241 patients with COVID-19 disease. At the beginning, was mandatory to hospitalize the asymptomatic patients for at least 2 months. So there, we have also asymptomatic patients. In our populations, 46 were men. Mean age was 60 years. 43 patients with moderate, and also 21 were with severe forms. Why severe forms in a hospital support type? Because COVID-19 patients is like kinder eggs. At the beginning, it is a moderate form, and during her hospitalization could be a severe form. We take care of 26% of military personnel, and all the rest were civilian. The mean days of hospitalizations were 12 days. 7 patients unfortunately died because of multiple comorbidities, and 30 patients were transferred in the hospital, in the COVID hospitals, because for intensive take care unit. Other results, as manifestations, our populations were with 69% of respiratory manifestations, 18 with severe pneumonia, 3.3 with cardiac manifestations, like myocarditis, 2.9 with pulmonary embolism, 28% with digestive manifestations, and even 33% with the manifestations like anxiety. As results, we analyzed hospitalizations days, food, laboratory tests, drugs costs, equipment costs, and imaging. And we assessed total costs and also mean costs per patient. You can see here that the essential costs was for hospitalization days. On the second plan, equipment costs, drugs, and laboratory tests. We saw that equipment costs were twice higher than for drugs and more than 3 times for laboratory tests. Regarding the severity of COVID-19 forms, we saw that average costs for mild and moderate COVID-19 disease form were about 300 euros per patient. For our hospital in Romania, for moderate and to severe forms, the costs were almost double. You must know that severe forms in Romania was almost 10,000 euros per patient. In our hospitals, was not possible to take care of patients like this, but I think this is an important information. As conclusion, in a small military hospital defined as support COVID that cared for predominantly moderate forms of COVID-19 infections, the costs for equipment were much higher than for drugs. Therefore, new criteria for hospitalization of these forms of COVID-19 deserve to be analyzed to avoid these useless costs. Another solutions, yes, there is very good solutions like vaccinations. We saw that in United States, over 280,000 COVID-19 hospitalizations could have been prevented by vaccinations during 3 months. And that means a lot of money. If you in June was 0.6 billion, and in August almost 6 billion. We also learned from this pandemic a lot. This is important for improving hospital care and healthcare delivery. The most important is the fact that hospitals must be prepared for unexpected increases in demand for services. And also, many countries have learned of the harms from no longer manufacturing certain medical equipment themselves. At the end, allow me to present Jakob Chihak Hospital, where I work since almost 2 years. The faculty where also I learned. And my COVID-19 team here are my residents, the chief of the nurses is here, my residents and myself. Thank you very much for your attention.
Mucho mesk, thank you. The Rock, please have your seat downstairs. And now is the turn for Portugal, our dear brother country. We share the same geographically west coast of Europe in the Iberian Peninsula. We are not friends, but brothers. Dr. Maria Lopez Rodriguez is a full colonel, Air Force doctor, and will tell us about Portugal experiences in nursing homes. Thank you. Obrigado, Doctora Salazar.
Buenos días. Good morning to all. I will start my first presentation entitled Controlling SARS-CoV-2 Spread in Veteran Nursing Home, Contingency Plan Implementation and Monitoring. This is the report of a successful pilot study performed by the Military Health Directorate and Military Hospital in collaboration with a veteran nursing home in the pre-vaccination era. Limiting SARS-CoV-2 spread is the way to control COVID-19. The pillars to achieve the control are, as we all know, to effectively test, track, trace, and isolate. Nursing homes, during the peak of the pandemic all over the world, were major hotspots of SARS-CoV-2 dissemination, with a disproportionately high mortality rate, mainly due to older age and multiple comorbidities. Some characteristics of today's nursing homes are elderly people living in close contact, most of them with multiple comorbidities, who need further support and frequently contact other healthcare facilities, staff with no full-time dedication, and suboptimal or inadequate infrastructures. And now, also, relaxation of measures after complete vaccination, which is also a risk factor. All of these are reasons why nursing homes were and still are at a greater risk of COVID-19 outbreaks. Recommendations to improve nursing home resilience included increasing standards and promoting best practice in 4 different areas. Adequate use of personal protective equipment, PPE, frequent testing, optimal infection control, and adequate emergency control system. Oh, the picture has gone up. What a pity, you don't see the building. Well, I hope you see it in the next, well, there's a wonderful building there somewhere. Concerned with the news reporting effects of the pandemic among elderly and nursing home residents in Italy and Spain, the first European countries with high numbers of COVID-19, we decided to implement a pilot study in a veteran nursing home with nearly 100 residents located in a rural area named Runa. This magnificent building dates from the late 18th century and was initially a military hospital, then an asylum, and finally a veteran nursing home. To identify, this pilot study aimed at optimizing control measures to prevent the virus spread. So we started by analyzing and optimizing the existing contingency plan, CP, then taking proactive steps to identify potentially infected residents and staff, and subsequently implement a reinforced CP and monitor it. After analyzing the existing CP and having performed survey visits to the entire areas of the nursing home, we proposed and implemented new isolation areas, optimized circuits concerning food, cleaning, laundry, and garbage, allocated staff to dedicated areas, proposed alternative solutions avoiding limitations in supply chains, and started a teaching and hands-on training program for all staff. To identify baseline and cumulative virus exposure, we characterized the population, all residents and staff, at baseline with PCR tests, and a serologic monitoring was performed based on IgG antibody as a longitudinal testing at 3 weeks, 2 and 6 months. Data collection was performed by an initial more extensive characterization of the population, complemented by monitoring clinical charts and visits during the whole 7 months timeline. Ethical permission for the study was obtained, and all participants or their legal representatives were informed and agreed to participate. And to note, we had a 100% participation rate among residents and staff. As results, in order not to bore you too much, I have selected only a few which illustrate the parameters. So, starting with the characterization of the population, more than 85% of the residents were 80 years of age or more. Based on the Bartel index, 58% of the residents were partially, very, or totally dependent. Almost 75% of staff had daily contact with residents, with 62% having close contact with residents. The initial 243 PCR screening tests were performed on site. A testing room was improvised, but all dependent residents were tested at bedside. The initial PCR screening tests identified 3 positive cases, all of them in completely asymptomatic residents. 1 independent resident and 2 dependent residents not staying in the same room. As one may imagine, this was absolutely unexpected, and it was a really disturbing result for all the staff and residents of this veteran nursing home. And what we saw was that among staff, panic installed. So we had fear and panic dominating all those workers. Staff of a nursing home is not comparable, and this is a big mistake. Staff of a nursing home has nothing to do with hospital staff. They are very different. They have different knowledge and different expertise. And concerning asepsia and infection control, it's absolutely not the same. So the immediate schedule of a training program with practical training in PPE, the big difficulty was how to choose which to put on, how and when to put it on, how and where to take it off, and how to discharge. All this was a completely new information for this staff. And hands-on training was what we performed in small groups after teaching, and it was absolutely the needed action. Also, we made in loco implementation and monitor of what we were teaching, and monitored and supervised what was going on. So, visible markings and signs, medical devices ready to use at the correct site, all of that we made at Runa. We made team training to limit entering in quarantine and COVID areas, and all that started with teaching and then went on smoothly. Visible markings and signs, and ready availability of disinfection solution for residents in key spots before entering the elevator, using the ATM, or when entering dining room. All of this was what we supervised. In Portugal, visits to nursing homes were suspended from early March to May 2020. On the 18th of May, visits were resumed, but with some restrictions to minimize the risk of transmission. In Runa, the visiting program evolved as shown in this graphic, and with a total of 806 visits in the analyzed time course. According to plan, 3 moments of serologic testing were performed. No further cases of COVID-19 were diagnosed in the analyzed period, and the results of the serologic survey were not surprising. There was 1 resident who had a detectable EGG throughout the whole survey, and although we knew that 3 residents had tested positive at baseline, and none of them ever developed symptoms through the illness, and only 1 of them developed EGG antibodies, only detectable at the 6-month survey. Oops. Sorry. There is one, I'm sorry, there was one missing. I had the results of staff that are very similar to the residents. So staff had also a very low incidence of antibody detection, and it was stable along the period we analyzed. In summary, laboratory monitoring showed that the overall disease incidence was kept to a minimum from April to November 2020. This work was conducted in a period during which several outbreaks were reported in nursing homes in Portugal, and the implementation of a reinforced contingency plan, even with contact with visits, monitored by a longitudinal serologic testing, was able to maintain this nursing home with a very low cumulative seroprevalence of only 2.4%. This strongly suggests that the measures taken were effective in reducing opportunities in virus introduction and spread among residents and staff, thus controlling SARS-CoV-2 spread in a veteran nursing home. Moreover, we witnessed that our training program had a reassuring and moralizing effect on staff. So, as a conclusion, once again, my beautiful, the beautiful image of the building once again is gone. I apologize to those of Runa who are assisting online. So, as a conclusion, we consider that a successful implementation of a reinforced contingency plan needs an adequate teaching and training program with no relevant material costs. This is what I had to tell you. Thank you very much for your attention in this first presentation.
Muito obrigado. Maria, muito obrigado. Thank you very much. Now it's time to the second lecture from Portugal, titled Portuguese Military Program to Nursing Homes. Thank you again.
So I will go on. My second presentation is named Portuguese Military Program to Nursing Homes. Thank you, Javier. This program was a response of Portuguese Defense Ministry to a request of collaboration made by the Ministry of Labour, Solidarity and Social Security. The present pandemic interfered with mankind all around the globe. However, some civilian structures were initially more prone or vulnerable in terms of dysfunction. nursing homes were and still are at a particular risk to SARS-CoV-2 infection, as I illustrated in my previous presentation. More risk of dissemination and outbreaks, higher morbidity, higher mortality. In October 2020, just before the second wave of COVID-19 in Portugal, an interministerial request of collaboration asked the Armed Forces COVID-19 Task Force to support civilian nursing homes all over Portugal, based on the positive impact achieved in Runa, which I just presented. So, as an extension, we were asked to cover the whole country and implement a program that could achieve effect on all nursing homes of the country. So a big task. Which were the characteristics intended for this military program? It should have a reassuring effect, for which a face-to-face visit was assumed as mandatory. Pertinent and up-to-date information should be transmitted. Because of difficulties in adapting national recommendations due to particularities in infrastructures and staff limitations, the possibility of technical advice and case-by-case solutions were of most importance. The whole program should have an immediate implementation. And last but not least, the targets of this program were a total of more than 2,700 nursing homes all over the national territory. The program aimed at safety by minimizing virus transmission and dissemination, safety for vulnerable residents, safety for hard-working staff and their families. Due to collaboration with National Health Service, the military health staff were implicated in numerous other settings. So, the on-site visit had to be performed by non-healthcare militaries. 139 awareness teams were built with 1 to 3 elements each from the 3 branches of the armed forces, and they were taught, trained, and supplied with didactic material by the Military Health Directorate. They were to perform on-site awareness and demonstration sessions for nursing home staff. These on-site visits represented the phase 1 of the program, here with some pictures showing different on-site sessions. As a complement, and in order to guarantee technical support to our frontline awareness teams, military medical doctors, nurses, and pharmacists were engaged in an additional real-time online session, which we called the Phase 2 program. Daily, from Monday to Thursday, thematic debriefing sessions were held, assuring technical advice and case-by-case solutions. The Joint Military Operations Command, through its Joint Logistics Support Group, ensured coordination and control of the planning and execution of the on-site visits, as well as the online sessions. The Joint Command also monitored through a dashboard all the actions with weekly updates. I give you here One example of the results of the Alentejo region, the on-site visits at the Alentejo region. This program had an important impact on nursing home community, but also among civilian society, with various local and national reports in television and papers, and also in international press. As a result of this positive public impact, civil authorities asked to widen the access to Phase 2 program, so staff of other social support structures, Air Force, always above. So we were asked to widen the program to include staff from other social support structures, but only for the Phase 2 of the program, the online program. This is the promotion poster of the complementary program, this second. We open online registration for real-time online training sessions scheduled by regions. The subscription was for staff only, free of charge, and we issued a participation diploma for those who completed the whole 4 sessions. The program became very popular with more affluence than expected, and we had to schedule extra sessions and take it a bit further in time. We applied daily an evaluation form, an online evaluation form during the online sessions to assess quality and usefulness with a qualitative classification of 5 parameters, and had a very positive result, which I show you here. It's a little combination. This dashboard has a combination of the results. I chose one from each region. So we worked for 5 different regions separately, and I put here one of each just to have a look that it was very similar between regions. So the first question was, you can see it here. The first question was the methodology of the session adequate? The second, this one, was the duration of the session adequate? The third, does it have applicability in my professional activity? This one, the session lived up to my expectations. And the last one, were the doubts raised by the participants adequately clarified? Finally, with only 1 week to prepare and launch this program, it took us 9 months to complete this huge task. So, to end my presentation, here are some of our achievements. 14 military health trainers who realized 116 online sessions and formed 139 awareness teams, which visited 2,490 nursing homes and spoke on-site to 34,756 staff members. In addition, another 13,977 staff elements from further social structures attended the online course. Thank you for your attention.
Maria, thank you so much. I apologize for this noise. It is in your honor, sirs, because of the National Day next 12th of October. Then we are practicing in order to know which is the way. Practically, the flights come from the south to the north in Paseo de la Castellana. Our king will be in some place near of this location. That's why we are now suffering that. Thank you. Now it's time for Spain. Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Puente, she's microbiologist and technical director of the Center of Pharmacy, Military Center of Pharmacy. Thank you, Pilar.
Thank you.
Take off your mask. Please, if you don't mind.
Buenos días, good morning. I'm going to talk about the Spanish National Strategic Medicines and Medical Devices Reserve Management Model. First, we are going to see an introduction about the current European framework. The pharmaceutical manufacturing and supply chains are complex, increasingly globalized, and sometimes not sufficiently diversified. So, many actors in different points of the world are so important in production processes. Certain technologies to produce raw materials are no longer available, and even before COVID-19 pandemic, there were concerns about the resilience of pharmaceutical manufacturing chains and supply of raw materials, intermediates, and active pharmaceutical substance. All of this are a potential risks of shortages of critical medicines. So the pandemic showed that public authorities do not often have access to complete information about the structure of the manufacturing and supply chains. Thank you. The President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, said, "We cannot wait for the end of the pandemic to repair and prepare for the future. We will build the foundations of a stronger European health union in which 27 countries work together to detect, prepare, and respond collectively." Consequently, the European Commission are working hard for building this stronger European health union. And that includes medical supplies and equipment are available. All EU countries prepare and respond together to health crises. They work to improve the prevention and treatment and aftercare of prevalent diseases, rare and emerging. The pharmaceutical strategy for Europe is one of the key initiatives in this framework. The COVID-19 pandemic has had a serious impact on Europe, and we saw strengths but also vulnerabilities. So in November 2020, the Commission proposed new pharmaceutical strategy covering the complete life cycle of a pharmaceutical product. Research and innovation, authorization, health technology assessment, and placing on the market, securing supplies of medicines, and delivery to patients. What we intend to address and how we intend to do it. First, unmet needs through research and innovation and clinical trials. Second, access to affordable medicines through pricing, reimbursement policies, competitions, and health technology assessment. Digitalization and new technology through research, development, and manufacturing, and technological transformations. And finally, anticipation and response to major health crises and open strategic autonomy through stronger supply chains, EU Health Emergency Response Authority, and reduction of the environmental impact of medicines. Another intention of the European Commission is to strengthen the supply chains through the strategic stockpiling. Shortages are increasingly frequent for medical products, and the reasons are complex, but including marketing strategies, parallel trade, scarce active pharmaceutical ingredients and raw materials, waive public service obligations, supply quotas, and issues linked to pricing and reimbursement. So in November 2020, the European Commission proposed building up EU's open strategic autonomy in the area of medicine requires actions to identify strategic dependencies in health and to propose measures to reduce them, possibly including by diversifying production and supply chains, ensuring strategic stockpiling, as well as fostering production and investment in Europe. Another European pharmaceutical strategy is intent structured dialogue with actors in the pharmaceutical manufacturing value chain, public authorities, patient and health non-governmental organizations, and research community. All of these are very important because we are able to understand how global applied chains work and identify the causes and drivers of potential vulnerabilities. And this is allow us measures to ensure the availability of critical drugs. Another initiative is through the big buyers, encouraging buyers in the health sector to cooperate to implement innovative procurement approaches for the purchase of medicines or medical devices, and collaboration between big public buyers in implementing strategic public procurement for sustainable solutions. And I want to point this EU for Health 2021-2027 program because EU's response to COVID-19 for a total amount of 5.3 billion euros and up to 12.5% is reserved for contrasting that complements the national storage of essential products relevant to crisis at the union level. This program will provide funding to eligible entities, healthcare organizations, and NGOs from EU or non-EU countries associated. So Europe is working hard, but now we have to face what the role of European military health service in this context. Now we are going to face in Spanish national model that it's a centralized model, cooperation, civil and military, to afford these needs before mentioned. So the Spanish Ministry of Defense has been collaborating with national health authorities in the management of strategic medicine for some time. Military pharmacy and civil authorities in communication with public health are cooperate in manufacturing, storage, and distribution of those medicines and medical devices to face health emergencies. For example, a smallpox vaccine and storage and manufacture of oseltamivir in H1N1 crisis. During COVID-19 pandemic, Ministry of Defense supported the Ministry of Health. How? First, facilitating acquisitions through international security and defense organizations such as NATO. Providing strategic international transport with military aircraft, and storing health resources and distributing them throughout Spain. So the pharmaceutical and logistical capacities of the Ministry of Defense were decisive for the government's management of the health crisis. Consequently, in March 2021, the Spanish government decided to create a national strategic reserve for healthcare material and to establish an interdepartmental commission to manage it, made up of personnel from the health and defense ministries. So the first question about strategic reserve design is a qualitative and quantitative composition. Ministry of Health, storage of medicines and medical devices for emergencies and disasters, always in cooperation with European pharmaceutical strategies. Also defines the composition of the national reserve, monitoring stock, sales, and supply forecasts to detect shortages and select candidates to build the strategic reserves. I have to point that autonomous community set its own strategic reserves at the regional level. So on June 2020, identifies and approves by regulation the medicines considered essential for the management of the health crisis caused by COVID-19. And consequently, this imposed on their manufacturers and their marketing authorization holders the obligation to notify the Ministry of the available stock, the quantity supplied in the last week, and the forecast of release and receipt of HCs, including estimated dates and quantities. Ministry of Defense store medical products as war reserves established by the Military Medical Directorate and accurate information and advice from the Ministry of Health. Health Authority of the Ministry of Defense have the data to perform the military pharmaceutical intelligence as a result of that close collaboration. And this is an important point because storage and transport. The storage and transport of healthcare resources are very specialized, expensive, and difficult to sustain. Its autonomous community follows its own model with more or less involvement of the private sector in its management. The degree of centralization of store and transportation of reserve varies from one to another. So Ministry of Health has logistic operators, but for security reasons, not recommended for the National Strategic Reserve of essential medical supplies to be guarded managed by the private sector. So Ministry of Defense, it's a guarantee of quality, safety and commitment, national guide network of storage sites distributed throughout its geography, as we can see in this map. So finally, cooperation between the autonomous communities and the central government is the solution to make strategic store more sustainable. And the Ministry of Defense already collaborates with some of the autonomous communities in health matters, especially with those where there are military hospitals. Quickly, finally, 7 points to resume this. First, the European Union member countries accumulate their national strategic reserves. Spain is working on its model of national reserve to support the autonomous communities. Military health services are showing as a key for the cooperation between Ministry of Health and Ministry of Defense. Third, identifying the pharmaceutical products to make up the strategic reserves will be only possible with the previous evaluation by multi-sector experts. The centralization of purchases at the European Union level will be easier than at the national level. 5, military pharmacy has an important role to play in the storage and transport of medical material, which are capabilities of strategic interest for national security. 6, this model, where the Spanish government supports the autonomous communities with easy strategic stockpile, through cooperation between the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Defense, with the Military Health Service as a link, could be extrapolated to the European Union and its member states. And finally, multiple benefits will be obtained with a new military concept, European Military Health Service in defense of the health of Europeans. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Pilar. Thank you. Now it's turn for France. Building up stocks of medical countermeasures against pandemics, the place of the French military health services in the response mechanism of the armed forces at the nations. Colonel Dr. Laurence Calvo has the floor. Thank you. Merci beaucoup. Je vous remercie.
Thank you, dear colleague. No? We lost the mouse.
Problems with the
The
mouse?
mouse doesn't
The
respond.
mouse doesn't work.
Okay. Well, 5 minutes of leisure time.
Do you want me to go down to the table? To go up to the table? Ouais, mais...
All right.
Please have your seat. I apologize for this technological inconvenience. Very sorry. Now it's time to continue with the French first presentation. Merci beaucoup, Colonel Calvo. Merci.
And it's better? Oh, I start again. Okay. General, sirs, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, it's an honor for me to give this presentation in Madrid here for the first edition of the Congress on National Military Health Services. And I would like to thank the organizers for this Congress. So, my presentation is called Building Up Stocks of Medical Countermeasures Against Pandemics, the place, and I would like to show you the place of the French military health service in the response mechanism of the armed forces and the nation. COVID-19 was a really tsunami all around the countries and constituted in many ways an international crisis, an economic crisis, an industrial crisis, and of course, a health crisis, a human crisis. All countries have suffered important human losses, mainly due to the numerous shortages, especially concerning medicines, drugs, masks, protective clothing, etc. In fact, a lot of things were missing. I should say everything was missing. And it was extremely difficult to restock because of the imbalance between supply and demand. One of the lessons learned is the need to build and consolidate our stocks. But another observation, as far as I'm concerned, is a question, in fact. Such a virus was and is able of disrupting in a major and lasting way our organization, the organizations of countries. So is COVID-19 a stress test for humanity in view of other infectious diseases like Ebola, like hemorrhagic fevers, like smallpox? When will next health crisis become? What intensity? What kind of infectious or biological agent? And in fact, how shall we be prepared? All the countries have had set up actions in order to consolidate all kinds of stocks, built a global response capacity articulated around a novel agency called HERA for Health Emergency Preparedness Response Authority, and this agency is the civilian response of the European Union to future outbreaks, to health crises of infectious disease, of infectious origin, whatever the origin. The armed forces and military health service showed interest in HERA to see what civilian European organization will build to face future pandemics. All nations built also an adaptive crisis management system able to scale up, to increase. They all make the same observation of need to consolidate the monitoring and the management of what we call low noise signals. And we all know it's difficult to manage to monitor low noise signals. And of course, All countries have the same observation of the necessity of reducing dependence by reindustrializing productions in Europe. In France, the complementary approach involves the consolidation of the interdepartmental, the interministerial organization, including the Ministry of Defense. But first of all, why is the Ministry of Defense involved in crisis resolution in France? Not just because the President Macron used military language when he announced during the first wave of COVID-19 that we were at war, but in reality, because the Ministry of Defense and the French Military Health Service in particular participates in all planning of exceptional situations. The contribution of the armed forces come to support the resolution of national crises because of specific capabilities like coordination, adaptability, hardiness, ability to command, responsiveness, logistical support. And the building up of stocks of medical countermeasures is one of the missions of the French Military Health Service in order to cover the needs of the armed forces. But French Military Health Service represent less than 1% compared to public health service, which is the national dedicated actor to manage health crisis. We have one priority mission, which is to support all types of the armed forces deployments. French Military Health Service has 5 pillars, 5 components, and those 5 pillars complete each other. It's the force medicine, the hospitals, research, school, and medical supply chain. In order to medicalize our wounded soldiers, French Military Health Service built stockage of medical countermeasures. I said medical countermeasures in the NATO sense, to guarantee the freedom of action and the continuity of the deployments and actions of French armed forces. And the contribution of all the means of the Ministry of Defense and the French Military Health Service in particular must respect a rule. We can be engaged only if civilian resources are insufficient, unsuitable, ineffective, or non-existent. So, in fact, there's no other solution. And this is exactly the case when we talk about resilience. These stocks are established and maintained by the French Military Health Service with financial resources allocated by the military staff, by the armed forces. They are exactly sized to cover the operational capabilities needed by the armed forces, but also in addition to these stocks. The contribution of all ministries, including the Ministry of Defense, is planned in order to respond to a Siberian event. And next year, another planification of operational capabilities will be considered to consolidate the interdepartmental response against pandemics. To which the Ministry of Defense and the French Military Health Service will contribute also. Concerning the medical countermeasures, they are purchased from manufacturers and also, I could say, homemade by the medical supply chain, the military pharmacy. In both cases, we favor priority to French or European providers, including raw materials. So, the military pharmacy, in particular, is a part of the medical supply chain. It's the industrial tool of the Ministry of Defense. It's one of the 5 pillars of the French Military Health Service, and I told you previously. It's a manufacturer, importer, holder, and operator of French marketing authorizations. It's also an internal use pharmacy and a manufacturer of some biological risk threats, agent detection kit. But its small size compared to large pharmaceutical companies, and its small size constitutes its singularity and also its strength. So the missions of the medical supply chain is to develop and manufacture specific drugs to cover the needs of the armed forces, to fill the gaps against Siberian risks or threats, and to develop drugs or medicine devices in the emergency medicine. Another mission is to be able, as far as possible, to increase, to scale up in order to guarantee the independence of the armed forces and also contribute to the resilience of the nation. The medical supply chain will be transformed in the years to come to be able to manufacture bioproductions in order to be able to produce other medical countermeasures and to increase the autonomy of the armed forces and the autonomy of the nation. The reorganization of the medical supply chain is possible thanks to its small size, because it allows the adaptation as soon as possible of the industrial workload plan. Since the World Trade Center attacks, the French Ministry of Solidarity and Health has established a national policy for acquisition, maintenance, and storage of capacities, including medical countermeasures, and some of them are manufactured by the French Military Health Service. We call that National Strategic Stock. And there's a co-location of both strategic stock, the military one and the national one, on a dedicated platform on the Ministry of Defense. In fact, a platform that it is in the French Military Health Service. And like the Ministry of Health, the issue now is to choose precisely what kind of medical countermeasures must become strategic in view of maintaining stocks that we need and the dedicated and enduring financial resources. In conclusion, French Military Health Service carries out the constitution and maintenance of stocks of medical countermeasures for the armed forces. It guarantees the storage of the national strategic stocks and its constitution to some extent. It contributes to the ramping up, the increasing of the national health crisis response capacity. Its priority mission is to support the armed forces deployments. Now, the issue is to prepare the next pandemics, regardless the nature of the infectious disease, the infectious agent, and its origin, natural, accidental, or intentional. The question is not if another pandemic will happen, but only when. Thank you for attention.
Merci beaucoup, Colonel Calvo. We love your English-French accent. Wonderful. Now is the turn of Colonel Antoine Leuft, a responsive medical capability building, lessons learned from the COVID-19 crisis. Merci beaucoup, Colonel.
C'est celui-là?
Yes. Generals, sir, dear colleague, it's a real honor for me to be here to talk about crisis capability building based on our experience during the COVID-19 pandemics. Before I start, as you can see, I don't prepare this work alone. I work with the Colonel Pharmacist Harrison, just here, the head of doctrine and capability building in France. So, the capability building is a long-term process whose duration can be several years, depending on the complexity of the equipment to produce. Beyond the equipment, it also consists of describing the doctrine and organization of the capability, the human resources that implement it, the support system that ensures its durability and resilience, and, of course, the training program. The capability is developed to meet the most probable scenarios. However, these use cases are still assumptions, and history has shown repeatedly that the equipment is not likely to fulfill all requirements and will need to be adapted. In a crisis, the system is under pressure, but also blindsided. If this crisis was anticipated as a potential scenario, the response may have been planned and adapted, and it's not a really capability challenge. This happened during the security crisis in Mali in 2013, and the deployment of an operational medical support system was not a problem. The French Army medical support system, highly experienced after 10 years of operation in Afghanistan, had integrated all the elements of modern warfare, modern war casualty management, like combat rescue, mobile medical teams, damage control surgery, and early strategic evacuations. The French medical service has played its role with the appropriate tools. To say that everything was perfect would be a lie, as the new format of our World 2 forward, called the antenne de réanimation et chirurgie de sauvetage, is the result of the lessons learned from this mission, particularly, but globally, the system was very robust and resilient. In contrast, the Ebola crisis in 2015 required a responsive approach to deploy a treatment center for caregiver on short notice with a few months and full respect of biosecurity norms. This was unusual for the French military health service, which did not have this kind of capability in its operational plan. However, the rollout schedule, which includes several months of build-up, permitted to the French military health service to develop an ad hoc capability. Once again, using pre-existing blocks, it was necessary to imagine a new, customized capability to produce the targeted effects. The experience accumulated in this mission was enormous, particularly in the control of biological risk in austere environments. The COVID-19 crisis is on a different scale. It surprised the whole world. Starting in China, the fast spread of the virus to the globe paralyzed the world. The worldwide nature of the epidemic stretched all the supply chain of essential health products such as masks, oxygen, or respirators. A real competition of these critical resources started between nations. Medically speaking, the epidemic exceeded the capacity of health systems. Thankfully, the epidemic's intensity was heterogeneous geographically, allowing for shifts in efforts and patient transfer to mitigate the impact. The French armed force contributed directly to these two types of action. First, the strategic transport aircraft, MRTT, was used for patient transfer. The number of vectors had to be increased rapidly, and medicalized version of our maneuver helicopter or our tactical transport aircraft adapted to COVID patients were set up in few days. An amphibious helicopter carrier was also used for patient transit from Corsica to the continent. The challenge was to adapt the ship to receive contagious patients in a confined environment and to avoid the contamination of the crew. But the most significant action for the French armed force during the first wave of the COVID-19 pandemic was definitely the deployment of a military intensive care unit to reinforce the Mulhouse hospital in the east of the France, which was the epicenter of the epidemic. This mission was significant in several ways. First of all, it was unprecedented. It was the first time that the French military health service deployed an heavy medical structure on its national territory. Secondly, by the type of the patient to be treated. If the armed force have capacity dedicated to casualties management, they are not They are not necessarily adapted to intensive care of patients with severe respiratory failure. The number of beds available is also a factor. With 30 beds, the military intensive care unit was, for 50 days, the largest intensive care unit in the French military health service. Finally, by the tempo imposed by the crisis, only 1 week elapsed between the presidential announcement of deployment and the admission of the first patient. If this delay may seem very long for a capacity on alert, it's extremely short for a structure created from scratch for this occasion. During this week, the military intensive care unit was designed, modeled, transported, deployed, and certified to the admission of the patient. Now we will look at the keys to the success of this operation. On this picture, you can see a mural painted on the Mulhouse hospital wall as a testimony to the civilian and military caregivers who fought together against the pandemics. The strength of the French military health service, as said Colonel Calvo, is an integrated healthcare system with all the skills required to plan and conduct a complete end-to-end medical support operation under a single command. In this way, it is very different from the French civilian health system, which is based on a decentralized territorial approach with a myriad of health agencies with very different responsibilities. The power of a single command and a very hierarchical structure was an important factor in the coherence and the speed of execution. Thus, the French military health service could rely on its autonomous and reactive capacity to buy medical equipment, which was a major advantage. It allowed it to acquire adapted medical equipment in addition to strategic stocks. However, that capacity can be difficult in a generalized shortage context due to the competition for resources and supply chain disruption. For this reason, it is essential to have a strategic equipment storage policy. In this way, the French military health service could rely on the stock of medical capabilities essential to its daily missions on its operational mandates. However, only a reactive engineering and capability building department has been able to capitalize on these resources to produce capabilities adapted to the crisis. Moreover, the French Army has a logistic regiment totally dedicated to deploying and supporting projected medical structures. The medical regiment support was decisive in all the phases of this mission. Even if the mission of this type of unit can be questionable outside of a large-scale operation with numerous victims requiring heavy medical and surgical capabilities, this crisis demonstrated how much the medical regiment could contribute to the national resilience. Finally, the French military health service was able to capitalize on its internal skills and equipment stocks to deploy an high-capacity tented intensive care unit in a short time to reinforce intensive care capabilities of the operational theaters and to enhance the strategic airlift capability of critical patients of the French armed force. For the French military health service, the yardstick was the management of the intensivist resource. During the first wave, the intensive care beds of the military hospital were too quickly and too widely committed on national territory, causing difficulty for us to provide targeted reinforcement. Even if the French military service has unique capacities, from a human resources point of view, it remained a very, very small actor, health actor on a national scale. It's therefore on qualitative action that it will make the difference. The French military health service is reactive and can be the starter of the crisis response. However, it must quickly transfer the national health actor to avoid compromising their primary mission, the medical support of operation. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Antoine. Please, the speakers, come back to the main table, please. We'll have 15 minutes for discussion, comments, answers. I am very proud of my speakers of the round table. Then I would like to thank you, all of you, once more for your presentations. And now it's time for any question in the room. The discussion is not only for the speakers, neither for the humble moderator, chairman, but for all attendees in this room. Please feel free to ask, comment anything. There is a person with a microphone at your disposal. Please.
Thank you. I'm Major General Dimitris Hadjigeorgiou from Greece. I would like to ask Portugal, actually, is there any specific law in Portugal preventing the interchange of personnel between the nursing homes? Because we know that this interchange was an important factor in other issues and cases that some of them have already published, and this is something that happens to my country also. Thank you.
Thank you. We are at the end of Europe, so when the wave came to Portugal, we had a little of lessons learned from the rest of Europe. So we were the last in Europe to have COVID entering. The main problem at that time was how to help the nursing homes in the way that they do not transfer all of their residents to hospitals, because we knew hospitals will not be able to cope with everything. And so we had to leave free, adequate access to hospitals for those patients from nursing homes who needed them, but try not to transfer all patients, because that was something we saw happened in some countries, in some regions, and we wanted to prevent that. We did not plan, there was not a planning of identifying COVID nursing homes. That was not part of the plan. But there were some buffer hospitals for nursing homes, because some nursing homes did not cope with creating different areas. So there were some buffer structures, and the military helped in that also, to create buffer structures for the nursing homes if a nursing home had an outbreak and had not the possibility of separate COVID and non-COVID areas. I don't know if I answered your question.
No, my question was, my question was regarding the personnel.
Ah, the personnel,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I thought it was
I mean
the residents.
the exclusiveness of personnel in each nursing home.
Shortage of personnel was a big issue because most of the personnel in nursing homes worked in several places. So there was not a law prohibiting, there was not a law, but there was a recommendation. Many nursing homes had nurses helping that worked in hospitals and could not leave their works at hospitals. So if they worked in 2 or more places, they had to keep working at the hospital, and so the nursing home was left alone without their help. There was not one strategy uniformly applied. I know from the military side, we built a huge voluntary database, and we had many older nurses, retired nurses that were on that database, and that we helped in allocating to several nursing homes, and that worked, but that's a small thing.
Another question? Please.
I think not a question. It's only to share some experience from the Germans. We have the same situation that we have the nursing homes and the lack of people to care for the elderly, and so we send people in. We send our nurses and doctors, sometimes doctors, to the elderly homes to support there, because we realize, and that is the same what Lieutenant Colonel Luft said, that the military hospitals, the field hospitals, are not suited for the care of intensive care units and respiratory patients. So I think every military has the experience, even the Americans with the USS Comfort going to New York, that we are trauma oriented in our training and also in our hospitals. So that is not a solution for this problem. So that is, I think, the first. We send people to the civilian hospitals, and our 5 Bundeswehr hospitals took care of civilian patients normally, routinely. We have 80% civilian patients, so we were part of the normal civilian healthcare system. So that was our contribution to the COVID-19 pandemic in Germany. But what we learned is that first of all, this personal protective equipment was very, very scarce resource. Yeah? There was some kind of capitalism in China that they paid up to 10 euro for one of these masks. So and the lessons learned from this is that we stockpile protective equipment in Germany, and so in millions of masks. We have surplus from this situation, and we stock them. The second thing is drugs. We rely heavily on China and India. They produce the drugs there, and we are hopeless in Europe if they stop the deliverance. So we have to find some solution. We come back to produce drugs by ourselves. Yeah? So that is the next lessons learned from this pandemic, to become more independent from countries who probably are future enemies. Yeah. So that is I think very important. So and we have production sites in the army, in our hospitals. We can produce drugs, and we will store raw materials. That is far cheaper to store raw materials and produce the product. That is also a lesson to learn. What we have to, and I think all what we discuss here is a European problem and not a national problem. Yeah? If every nation does its own thing, that is not a sound decision. Yeah, we have to do it on a European level, and to produce drugs and store equipment, and that I think that is a lesson we should have learned.
Sir, I think everybody is agree with you. Thank you. Another question?
So this panel is about strategic stockpiling, and I think we all agree that the vaccines are the way out of this pandemic. I think we were all quite impressed by the speed of the development of the vaccines within 1 year after the outbreak. So that's very quick. But does the panel see any role for military in the production of the vaccines? So once you have your marketing authorizations, you still need to produce the batches. And that's where we have the rhythm determination of the vaccination campaigns. Is there any role for military? You cannot stockpile these vaccines. So what is the solution?
I'm not sure I heard all the
Please, will you mind repeating the question?
Yeah, because all the noise are around.
The microphone.
Strategic stockpiling
Yeah.
is about everything but the vaccines. What about vaccines?
Oh. Est-ce qu'il faut stocker les vaccins? It's not an easy question, and it's not the subject for the military health, French military health service yet. Yet the reflection is about stockpiling, determine what medical countermeasures, drug, equipment, not vaccine. So I don't think the French military health service will produce vaccines because it costs a lot of money, a lot of financial resources, and a lot of tools, industrial tools, pharmaceutical industrial tools to do that, and we don't have the capacity to do that. The development of the military pharmacy that we see is against monoclonal or polyclonal antibodies, not vaccines. And I don't think we will be able to stockpile vaccines. And I don't think, as far as I'm concerned, that it's really the mission of the French military health service. I think, as far as I'm concerned, and I speak under your responsibility, that it's a problem of health, of public health service, first of all.
Please use the microphone, please.
It is not our mission. We don't want it. We don't want to substitute the health system, the public health system.
It's not the question.
Right.
Last question, last comment, please. Por favor, aquí, al general. Gracias.
Thank you. Lieutenant General Pierre Nerings, the Belgian Surgeon General. for Dr. Mariana. The next study could be interesting to have a look at the costs of long COVID patients, because it could be the next step, and we will face that also in the military. So to have a close look on that could be a good idea for the next studies. And a comment for Colonel Calvo. If I may, you mentioned in your speech about the Health Emergency Preparedness and Response Authority, no agency.
I said agency?
No, it's authority.
Authority, yeah.
That means that this body created by the President of the EU Commission, we do not have any connection from military side with this civilian body. That could be very interesting to connect with this civilian body, because every nation, as we all experienced during the last crisis, we will be involved in the crisis management. That means that this health emergency authority need also to be connected with military and medical services. And that's the reason why I suggest to my colleagues, Surgeon Generals, to mention that at the political level, because at any time for the next one, we will be involved. And if this authority is taking decision with ECDC or with European Medicine Agency, we will be part of that. But we have to be present in ERA concept. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before finishing our roundtable, let me introduce again Colonel René Pita. He will do the summary, the wrap-up of the roundtable. Please have the floor, Colonel. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, everyone. I'll be brief, as it is almost lunchtime. And most importantly, because the key concepts of a military support for a European strategic medical stockpile have been mentioned in all 6 presentations and during the discussion, but also in Major General Sanchez Ramos' opening keynote speech, as well as in General Cowich's online lecture about the MNCC-EMC force to provide medical support in Europe. The need of a strategic stockpile of medical countermeasures in case of mass casualty events is beyond doubt in the military community, and the COVID-19 pandemic has shown the need to develop and enhance similar capabilities not only at the national level, but also in multinational organizations, including the European Union. Moreover, as our speakers have remarked, the armed forces must cover their needs, maintaining routine ongoing military operations, but they must also support nations' resilience efforts. We had presentations on how different military medical services provided support in the COVID-19 pandemic crisis, and this experience can be used as a model to support a European strategic stockpile during public health emergencies. All speakers have shown the importance and the complexity of capability building when planning and budgeting healthcare resources in preparing for a future pandemic. But a good anticipated planning will reduce stress and impact when the new challenge takes place in the future. In this regard, the single command system has proven to be an effective approach when planning and conducting medical support operations. It is also necessary that military medical services closely cooperate with civilian authorities, as they will have accurate information about the resources required. Critical issues in a strategic stockpile that have been mentioned include industrial production capability and availability of raw materials, and also the nature and quantities of the stockpile products. In fact, the COVID-19 pandemic revealed vulnerabilities in the global medical supply chain, like, for example, PPEs or ICU assets necessary for starting and maintaining patients on ventilators. All these stockpiles of medicines and medical resources should be based on medical intelligence risk analysis, considering that these are dynamic processes and reassessment should be performed when threats and vulnerabilities change. Sustaining a strategic stockpile also involves managing the entire life cycle of the different resources, as well as acquiring, storing, and transporting supplies. Overall, all these technical and logistical aspects can also benefit from military medical capabilities available and minimize disruption of supply chains. Finally, it is important to develop an effective training program that must cover down to the local authority level to ensure that the right resources are ready and can get to the right place at the right time. In conclusion, the goals that our chairman established in his introduction have been achieved as this panel has provided important lessons learned and identified on how armed forces can support a European strategic medical stockpile in future pandemics. So thank you very much for your attention. And now to close the panel, I would like to pass the floor back to our chairman.
Thank you very much, Colonel Pita. Now I would like to request from you, please, a big applause for our colleagues. Lunchtime, enjoy your lunch. Please follow the Spaniards. Thank you very much.
Sorry, please remember to leave the translators you have